Rather than spending hours and hours scouring the web trying to find an unbiased source of world news, the search is over once you discover Straight Arrow News. Whether you're checking out the app on your mobile device or on a browser on a PC, Straight Arrow News has just the facts right at your fingertips, without concern of being lied to and manipulated like the mainstream media so often has done to us. Regardless of what side of the political spectrum you're on, Straight Arrow News has something for you, and it's a place you can trust to find all the information you need. Head on over to san.com/geekdom or click the link in the description and see for yourself. After a 1-week break, Dragon Ball Daima returns with episode 13. This episode is called Surprise. Let me paint the picture for you. Obviously, as many of you saw, Super Saiyan 3 Vegeta defeats Tamagami 2 in the previous episode, episode 12, and now as it stands, Goku and the gang have 2 of the 3 demonic Dragon Balls. Meanwhile, Dr. Arinsu has 1 after Majin Buu defeats Tamagami 1, and Gomah has now discovered that Arinsu's plotting against him, as now there appears to be a big confrontation brewing between all 3 groups, all 3 parties, likely in Demon World 1 very, very soon. Also, sometime today, the English dub of Daima should be popping up on Crunchyroll. I do not know about the other streaming services, so check your streaming service that you're watching Dragon Ball Daima on for updates. I'm not sure what the schedule is for the other ones, but Crunchyroll gets priority before anybody else does. So when it comes to this episode of Daima, my thoughts. Well, basically, the only real plot point that I found to be truly relevant as far as the story goes is what happened in the first few minutes of the episode. The rest of the episode is this sort of bizarre adventure with Goku and the gang. Like, their ship ends up having to be landed and Bulma and Pansy are repairing it. Again, there's more ship problems. Obviously, you can point the finger as far as who keeps doing this. But they're in this sort of foresty area, and they end up battling all kinds of natives and inhabitants of Demon World 2. So this episode felt a lot more like the earlier Daima episodes, like 3, 4, 5, and 6, than what we got from episode 8 and episode 12. And I know that might bother some people. And to be honest with you, normally it wouldn't bother me so much. If Daima was a longer anime, like if it was 35 episodes, this would make sense to me. But we are in episode 13 of a planned 20. And I just feel like at this point, I'm just more hyped to see what ends up happening in Demon World 1 than anything else in Demon World 2. It was almost like with the Demon World 2 part of the story, we got the Tamagami fight early. It was like, without counting the Kraken, the first real obstacle, the first real battle of Demon World 2. And now we're getting a bit more of like the world building by seeing some of the creatures that live in Demon World 2, which I'm sure was a ton of fun for Toriyama to draw. There's a lot of imagination in this episode. The production is obviously great, well directed, well animated, but the plot is slowing down once again, and I'm not really a big fan of that, to be honest with you. The major plot point I want to get into is that at the beginning of the episode, Gomah, the episode was even called Surprise, and I guess what Gomah did was the surprise because it was definitely something that I was not expecting, or many of you probably weren't expecting. So Gomah is frustrated at this madness going on around him, so he tells Degasu to turn off warp. And what we end up seeing is this sort of chamber somewhere in the palace. Again, really creative, lots of colors, and a very sort of it reminded me of the part where they go into warp for the first time. Just a lot of real, like, otherworldly creativity here. And he sort of grabs this giant lever and pulls it down, and warp falls asleep. So the idea here is that if they can't use warp because he's asleep, everyone is trapped where they are. Nobody can come into the demon realm or leave it, and you can't go between worlds. However, if you remember all the way back in Daima episode 3, Shin revealed that there is another way, and that there is a direct connection between the demon worlds that was sealed off many, many years ago. But it seems like warp shutting down is an effective plan for now. But obviously, there's that backup that was already foreshadowed before. So I think that either way, they're going to get to Demon World 1, even without warp. So that to me was probably the most interesting part of the episode. The rest of the episode, they have some comedy with Pansy and Bulma trying to fix the ship. With Hibis, they're using him as almost like a ladder, like a step ladder. And then Goku and Vegeta and Piccolo and them have to deal with these creatures from Demon World 2. It's not just the Kraken that's dangerous there. And I thought for sure we were going to see the Glin trees at some point, not in this episode. They have to deal with these creatures and this big ogre, and it becomes this sort of situation where they have to work together to overcome and get the ship back on course to get to where they're at. So again, it feels like those earlier Daima episodes. Dragon Ball Daima is going to have parts of Dragon Ball, like that kind of vibe, Z and GT. And I think we've seen some of the Z stuff already with the Vegeta fight and the Goku fight with the Tamagami. And even the Majin Buu Tamagami 1, or Majin Do Tamagami 1 fight, even that felt, even though it was more comedic, it still felt like that classic, Buu arc type of battle. Whereas here, look, this episode felt the most like a GT episode of anything we've gotten so far. And that's for better or for worse. Take your pick. What I mean by that is the Black Star Dragon Ball arc, where they're looking for the Black Star Dragon Balls, going from planet to planet, sort of on these little side quests, trying to resolve issues or escape some kind of danger to get the ball. Now, in this episode, there were multiple times where I was genuinely wondering why this is such a big problem for them, considering how strong they are. Like, there's a battle with this ogre, and obviously, I know that Goku doesn't want to kill a native of the demon realm, especially if it's like an animal. Like, I understand all that, but he didn't have to do that. Let's not forget that Goku knows how to use the Taiyo-Ken, aka the solar flare, right? Now, obviously, there's no sun in the demon realm, but that's okay because you don't need the sun. You can just use the ability. It's called Sun Fist because you're sort of creating an artificial beam of sunlight to blind your enemy. They could have done that to get out of the problem. Instead, there's a little scene where Goku goes Super Saiyan and fights. It's actually kind of funny. He's got a ruler, like this ogre, giant orange ogre. He's got like a bunch of books. He's a studious ogre, and and these are giant books. And when I say a giant ogre, I want to make sure I explain to you what that means. It wasn't quite as big as a great ape, but it was close. It was that degree of difference in size. And he has the ruler, and Goku has the Nioibo, and like they're kind of having a power struggle with it. And Goku, even in his earlier Super Saiyan forms, or even in base, is able to do these feats of superhuman strength that he could easily knock this thing out, or at the very least, temporarily blind him with the solar flare and dip. And I'm waiting for that, and the episode didn't do that. And I thought that was one of the things about some of those early GT episodes that I didn't like, is that there are multiple ways to get out of problems, and it's like they just forget what they can do, which actually, that existed before GT. That's not a GT only problem. Let's not forget that in Dragon Ball Z, when Goku gets to Namek, he puts his hand on Krillin's forehead and is able to read his thoughts and figure out everything going on up until that point. And that's an ability we never see Goku use again. So you could say Toriyama forgot. In that case, He did. I think people assume Toriyama forgets more than he actually does, but there are cases where he genuinely does. I mean, that's rooted in reality. So this felt like that to a degree. It's disappointing because I felt like the episode, I didn't hate it. I wasn't like entirely bored with it or anything like that. I just sort of felt like it feels like we're moving backwards now, not necessarily backwards like, we're not regressing the story, but we're going back to episodes 5, 6, and 7, which I've said multiple times could have been fused into one episode. Again, if this show is going to be 20 episodes, I feel like unless the last couple of episodes are longer, I think people are expecting this to move a bit faster. And while I remember, I'm a RPG fan. I love little side quest stuff like this. This I didn't think was necessary. I'm happy we're learning more about Demon World 2. I'm not saying I'm not, but I still feel like at this point, learning about the Glins, learning about the Namekians, all that stuff, the Rymus stuff, that all was springboarded from them going to Demon World 2. That's plenty of lore. Like, that is so much more lore than anything that I was expecting going into Daima. And I went into Daima with previous knowledge, already knowing it was going to be a bunch of new lore about the demon realm. But I didn't go into it thinking they were going to explain the origin of the multiverse. I mean, that went way beyond what I was expecting. So after hearing the Rymus stuff, brought us more than enough things to talk about and to speculate about and to theorize about than just this little side quest where, again, the ship has problems. And again, Goku, Vegeta, Piccolo have to work together. But at least Piccolo did something here. At least he helped out. Him and Vegeta, they helped out. And going back to the Rymus stuff, like the Rymus stuff was stuff that could be relevant later on. These like giants and ogres and, these different civilizations, they're cool in short spurts, but the likelihood of any of this mattering in the future doesn't seem very high. Goku and Vegeta fighting these angry, oversized hamsters, you know what I mean? Like in a forest. I felt like if they had taken, the majority of this episode and just sort of cut it up and put it in the first half of the episode, then in the second half of the episode, the plot progresses a bit more, I wouldn't have had a problem with it. But the fact that it was just the Gomah stuff right at the beginning, then the rest of the episode is this side quest. Like, I feel like with episode 13, especially after how insane and over the top episode 12 was, there are still more things left in the series that need to marinate a bit more that, in my opinion, should take priority. Now, obviously, they're not making this show weekly. This show was put into production in 2022, and at that time, when this whole thing was being mapped out, it wasn't like they were able to see any of the feedback. So it's not like they're able to course correct it, because the story for this series and the scripts for these episodes were done ages ago. And please understand, you should know this by now. It's not that I don't like adventure. It's not that I don't like world building. And it's not that I don't appreciate Toriyama's work on this series and what he had in mind. It's just that this episode feels mostly inconsequential to the rest of the story, even more so than even the stuff from earlier in the series. There are more things I want to talk about, which I'm going to save for my breakdown video tomorrow here on the Geekdom 101 YouTube channel. I'm going to go into more of the lore and sort of where Toriyama pulled these ideas from, and overall just things that you missed. With that being said, take care. See you guys tomorrow.